All right, good morning. I woke up a little early today and I've been thinking a bit about my current sunflower crop and wanted to cover quite a few things here because there's a few things to cover here that really address questions that people answer a lot. And one of the big things I see on forums is um, how to control mold on crops, and not just sunflower as in this case, but in any crop. So there's a lot of things we talk about. We definitely talk about airflow, having good airflow to reduce disease. And then people also talk about sanitation. I'm really big on sanitation, not just the seeds, but the trays. Everything has to be clean. Um, and then people also talk about using bleach or hydrogen peroxide, which are good ways to control it when it's there. But our general approach to mold is to set it up so you don't have it in the first place. And if you have it, yes, you need to use hydrogen peroxide or something to control it. But if you have mold, then something is not right and it needs to be changed. So in some of my previous postings, um, I had really bad mold in my sunflower crops. And looking at my records, I had about 7 crops in a row that were basically wasted. Wasn't even enough to make it worth harvesting. And I looked at a few different things, and what were my assumptions. So what I'm looking at is, what am I doing wrong here? What needs to change? Because having grown tens of thousands of trays of sunflower, I know that mold shouldn't be there. And so through a few things, I basically pinned it down to my organic matter content, or rather my compost content. So I talked about this before in creating a soil mix. It's nice to have a component of compost in there, but you don't want too much. One of the reasons why is a rich compost can have a high salt content, and that actually draws water out of plants. That can be detrimental. Um, but what I've seen here is it really, I think, was the compost content that was causing the mold. Why I came to that conclusion is because so I made a new soil mix. I added some more compost to it because I wanted it to be richer, because I was going to use that to grow some tomato plants. And my tomato plants actually didn't grow in that, or rather didn't germinate in that very well. And I basically tested my theory there. I said, well, I think it's the compost. It's too rich. There's too much activity. The seeds are decomposing before they germinate, which is something that happens with tomatoes. So what I did is I made another mix, and I actually just used the regular grower's mix number 4. So it's got the peat and the perlite and some lime in it, and I added no compost. I started a new tray of tomatoes, and they all germinated. So with this batch of sunflower, I used that same mix. So just a pro mix without any compost added at all. And my previous mix that I started with several months ago had a little bit of compost in it, and it was also fine. So really it was having a soil mix where I added too much compost to the mix when I started seeing the mold. When I went back to a basic mix without compost, the mold went away. Or, we'll see as I'm about to demonstrate here. So this is a crop that I sowed, I believe, 3 or 4 days ago. And it's the first time with this new mix. I have been looking at it on a day-to-day basis to see if I see any mold, and I haven't. So I think it's looking pretty good. So the thing I did there was I changed my soil mix, I reduced the compost content, and that seems to have solved the problem. I still expect I'm going to get pretty good growth. Um, what's interesting is another thing I've added into my system is some heat mats in order to bump up productivity, which in my thinking would actually make the risk of mold even higher. And so having added this component that I think was going to make it worse, and it still hasn't showed up, really points towards the importance of having the right soil mix. And so this is something I talk about a lot. If you're seeing problems with growth, often it is your soil mix. And it can take a while to get the right mix, and small changes can go a long way. And all I did was a small change in the compost content, and that's what basically ruined my mix, and I've gone through and corrected it. Um, Another thing I'll address in my last batch, actually, with the old mix, that had too much compost in it. I did get some mold. I was able to control it with hydrogen peroxide. And then another thing I did is I uncovered it a little earlier than I would have liked to. And so as soon as you uncover and get out of the germination stage, which we have here, your mold risk reduces, and the mold that's there usually dissipates. It usually just disappears. And so I was able to control the mold by one, maybe two sprayings of hydrogen peroxide, and then, yeah, by uncovering early. And I ended up getting a fairly good crop and a fairly good yield on that. So that was very effective. But what I don't want to do is create an extra step. I don't want to spray it before I sow and then lift it up and spray it while it's growing, which it's not a big deal when you've got 2 trays, but if you're doing 200 trays of production in a commercial system, that's a big expense. And the fact is, I'm kind of lazy. I don't want to be spending my time managing this if I don't have to. I want things to grow simply and easily because I know it can be done. So yeah, so just sort of waxing poetic about that. So I have changed the mix here, and so we're going to take off. So the other thing I wanted to just touch on is this question of when do you uncover a crop? And I'm doing this now because this is the ideal time. And I'm going to just bring the camera down here so you can get a better look. So I'm often looking for different signs, but one thing is you can see is the top tray is clearly lifted off of the bottom tray. So there's definite space between there, and you can really start to see the stem. So I can see that. The other thing I'm seeing on the side is I've got some micros growing out the side, and I can see that this tray has been shifted a little bit. So they've grown up enough that the stems are long enough that they can shift, and that really is the like a really good point at which to uncover. I might leave this till mid-afternoon to let it grow a little bit more, but this is actually a really, really good time. It works well with my schedule today, so this is when I'm going to uncover it. I'll add in my previous batches, I've been doing 2 blocks on top, and these are each 15 pounds. So I did reduce it from 30 to 15, thinking that might be a factor. It could be here. I also wondered if the pressure was affecting the heat mats underneath, because it's a lot of pressure on there. So I'm going to take my block off here, and it is very heavy. And we'll uncover our crop. And so I'm glowing on the inside, having had so much mold trouble. I've got a really, really nice looking crop here. I'm going to turn my light on. Hopefully we can get a better view there. And we'll get a look in here. So you can see we have no mold in here whatsoever. You might see some of these root hairs that people often mistake for mold there. And these are actually ones that haven't rooted down really well. You can see one right here. It's put its root down, but it hasn't had time to get anchored in yet. And this is actually one of the reasons, and I've talked about this before, is this seed mix is actually, it's from Italy, and the seed itself is quite variable in size. And so what happens is you get the bigger seeds are bigger, and the smaller seeds end up with smaller micros. And so they grow at different rates. And this is actually a real pain in the ass, to be honest. I'm not really happy with the seed. But having the weight on top kind of slows the bigger seed, and so you get something a little closer. In a commercial system, this is a pain in the ass because you end up having lots of hulls to pick off the small ones. For a home system, I just pick out most of the hulls, and then I just pick them out as I use them. That's totally fine. As a commercial grower, I don't want my customers, my chefs, whatever, to have to do that. So I really want to have a uniform size seed, and so the crop is shedding its hulls all at the same time. So yeah, so this is actually a really nice looking crop. I'm really happy with it. My last one actually, which I did some work on, was my highest yield yet, and I expect to get a pretty good yield on this. I've got very good light in here. I've got 4 bulbs for the tray, plus I've got some natural light. And so what that really tends to result in is a nice deep green crop as well. There's a lot of photosynthesis happening there. So yeah, I'm actually expecting to get close to 600 grams for this tray, and I'm usually aiming for 650 to 700 in a commercial setting. So I'm pretty happy with that for this. So okay, some questions here. That's great. So airflow to germinating covered seeds. So when this tray was covered like this, there's pretty good airflow around here. Like, things I'm looking at is like there's a barrier here, there's a barrier there, but this is quite open, and there's airflow around. I also have a window here that I can open. So even though you're not really necessarily getting airflow right inside there, having airflow around it actually really does help and makes things effective. The other thing is, yeah, ideally it wouldn't kind of be backed into a corner like this, but there's still enough movement around here. And what you can do if you want a bit more is you set up a fan somewhere so that just increases airflow in general. So even though it doesn't seem like you'd get good airflow under there, you do. Another factor is these trays actually have these ridges. So there's little channels in here, and that actually makes it better relative to, for example, like something that's perfectly flat and rests right on top. Even that gives a little more airflow, as well as the holes in here actually. In my early days, I used to use a piece of coroplast or corrugated plastic on top and had a lot of trouble, and that went away when I switched to the tray. So you create sort of a situation where even though airflow will always be limited, you try to make the best use of what you can there. So I thought I saw another question pop up, but it's gone. So something about, yeah, so maybe it was a question about applying sanitizer. So yeah, here's someone suggesting a water and vinegar solution. I have a little spray bottle here actually, which I use for my hydrogen peroxide. It's a 4%. Yeah, stacking, the question there, I only stack in threes. I never stack more than three. And then, yeah, you want to uncover, like I said, once the tray is lifted off a bit and starting to shift a bit. So this for sunflower is a really good height. The rule of thumb is usually uncover earlier than later. You're more likely to get a better result if you uncover earlier. So keep that in mind. So that's what I've got for today. This bit about controlling mold there is very important. So I do hope you find this useful, because if you're controlling your soil mix, getting the right compost amount in there, you can really reduce your mold on the surface, and that's going to make much less work and give you a much higher yield. So yeah, thanks for joining me this morning, and we'll have more videos coming out soon. We just had our crop planner webinar yesterday, based on the spreadsheet I use to do our crop planning and our financial planning. That'll be posted online soon, and I'll put some links and comments in some of these videos